Hello and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'll be going over my favorite moments from each Pokemon game. And I'll be doing one moment per game. I will not be including remakes such as Heart Gold or Soul Silver, also Brilliant Diamond, Shining Pearl, Fire Red, Leaf Green, etc, etc. I will also not be including any spin-off games like XD Gale of Darkness or, Colosseum. I will be using the alternative versions like Black and White 2 and Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon because I consider those to be the more complete versions of each game. With that being said, let's get into the first entry. The first up is Red, Blue, and Yellow. I would say that in the first gen games, one moment that really stuck out to me when I played it was the moment you fight Giovanni. Giovanni's fight, as a kid anyways, to me, was like the pinnacle. You go through the whole game hearing how bad this dude is, and then you finally face him, and he's a gym leader. Of all things, he's a gym leader. Not to mention his team is insane, with Dugtrio, Nidoqueen, Nidoking, Rhydon, and Persian, since I played Yellow. So his team was formidable. The boss fight felt incredible, and when I finally got over it, it felt so awesome to finally beat Giovanni, this absolute, unit of a gym leader. So that by far is my favorite moment in the Gen 1 games. Still one of the most memorable because it was one of my first. Funny enough, I played Yellow probably as my third game, which is just the weirdest order to ever go in things, but that's how I did it. Next up, we have Gold, Silver, and Crystal. And I played Silver. By far, my favorite moment in Silver was finally catching Raikou. The first time I encountered Raikou on one of the main roads right after you go to the tower. After that, he ran away. When he ran away, my kid brain decided it was a good idea to solely hunt for Raikou for probably way too long. I remember hunting for him, and then I finally found him again, only to have him run. And then I searched again, and then I finally caught him, and it was the most I felt so elated that I had finally caught Raikou after 3 weeks of non-stop searching for one Pokemon. I could have gotten a shiny in that time, now that I think about it, but when I finally caught him, and I named him Zappy, because he's so adorable, and I love him. I love Raikou. He's my favorite of the Wandering Trio. Next up is Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. And like I said, I played Emerald. Emerald is by far one of my favorite Pokemon games. My absolute favorite moment of any Pokemon game was always entering Sky Pillar and seeing Rayquaza standing there. To me, in my brain as a kid, when I first experienced that and I saw the box art legendary sitting in the middle of Sky Pillar, and you could go up and you would battle it, I was just shaking with anticipation as a 6-year-old, holding on to that Master Ball just in case I could ever find Rayquaza. And finally, I saw him, and I took my Master Ball, tossed it at Rayquaza, and my heart beating out of my chest because I didn't know if it was an actual 100%. So, when I finally caught him, I was just so ecstatic. Because Rayquaza is one of my favorite Pokemon, and arguably the best box art legendary that has ever existed, and that is by far one of my favorite moments, is walking into Sky Pillar and seeing Rayquaza just standing there menacingly. It was like a kaiju-sized monster that I wanted to keep as a pet. His shiny is my absolute favorite shiny of all time. I have a plush of it. Next up, we have Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. Platinum, like I've mentioned, is the game that really cemented my adoration for Pokemon. I remember borrowing Diamond from my best friend in middle school, and I picked Turtwig because Turtwig and Piplup are two of my favorite starters of all time. Arguably some of the best in the series, other than Squirtle, Trico, and maybe and Cyndaquil, definitely Cyndaquil. But my favorite moment comes from that game, and that's going into the Distortion World after Cyrus. That moment was so sick, because you enter this just foreboding world that you have no idea where you're at. You see all these floating islands, you hear that creepy theme music. It's so haunting but enchanting, and you venture further and you see glimpses of Giratina, and finally you go up and you battle Giratina, and it was just one of my favorite moments of all time. And crazy enough, Giratina, on top of being one of my favorite moments, Giratina was actually a shiny, and it was the first shiny I've ever seen. It was the first way I found out about shinies, and it's still to this day one of the most insane moments of my life, because as an adult now, I know how crazy that was, that a first encounter Giratina was a shiny. It's so wild that that happened, but it was just one of my favorite moments. And Giratina's shiny is easily my second favorite. And next up, we have Black 1, White 1, Black 2, and White 2. Regardless of it being Black 1 or 2, or White 1 or 2, my favorite moment in Unova is definitely seeing Ghetsis for the first time. There was, and still isn't, much like Ghetsis. I mean, as a high fantasy nerd, Ghetsis is incredibly cool to look at. I geek out every time I see him because there's not much, save for one other place in Galar, that looks like Ghetsis, and it's so sick. Just look at his design. It's so amazing. I love Ghetsis' design because it's like, he stands out among everything. Like, there's the whole meme about him being in Team Rainbow Rocket and how just out of place he looks. But I really wish that they would do more stuff like Ghetsis, because as a nerd, and a high fantasy nerd at that, like D&D and RPGs and just everything like that, I gotta say, Ghetsis is just amazing. I mean, he's creepy as all hell, but so cool. Like, his whole outfit and aesthetic is just sick, and I love it. I wish they would do more like that, but they probably won't. I am excited for Scarlet and Violet, and I'm going to be doing a playthrough of that, because let's go! It looks so sick. Next up, we have X and Y. Y, in my opinion, was one of the better Pokemon games. That being said, Mega Evolving for the first time was just such a cool moment. Being in the Tower of Mastery and going to rematch Karina, only to climb up the Tower of Mastery in that cinematic way, and then finally, you know, you hear about Megas, and you hear about all this stuff about Lucario while you travel up, but then finally you meet her at the top, and you see her with her 2 Lucario, and she hands you your Mega Ring, and then Lucario wants to come to your team, and then you and Lucario fight Karina and her Lucario, and you Mega Evolve for the first time, and it's just like seeing a Pokemon go in Super Saiyan. It's literally like watching Goku go Super Saiyan for the first time. It is one of the coolest moments in any Pokemon game, and I would genuinely say that Mega Evos are the best. Better than Dynamax, Gigantamax, like those are cool, but Megas were so awesome. They upped the game when it comes to how Pokemon could look and how powerful they could be. And I really wish that they would do more with Megas, but they won't, because I know their whole shtick is that, you know, a new gimmick now every Pokemon game, and I'm fine with that. But I wish that they would bring back stuff like that, like alternative versions that you could have for a short period. If you watch anime, any kid's fantasy is to go like Super Saiyan. So that was just, it's still one of my favorite moments of all time in a Pokemon game, and it's stuck with me for years. Next up, we have Sun, Moon, and the Ultras in the games. Alola, to me, is probably the weakest game because, I don't know, I just don't like the games. They're kind of boring, all things considered. The story is bleh, the game itself is relatively easy, and just, I don't know, it wasn't really much of a challenge. Like, even like in the terms of these are made for kids, which, if I remember correctly, they're not. They're like, I think the creator stated that they're not made for kids, but in the terms term that they are made for kids, quote unquote, it's still even on the easier side. Like, I know 6-year-old me would still not have a trouble with this game whatsoever, so they were very boring. However, I think they solved a bit of that in Ultras, but it's still there. It's still not a competent challenge. Like, all of the kahunas don't feel like a challenge. The quote-unquote Elite Four don't feel like a challenge. None of the bosses really feel like a challenge, except for one. In the Ultra games, you battle one type of thing that is a challenge, and it's one of the coolest challenges, and that's the Ultra Beasts. The Ultra Beasts are so unique and just stand out in that game as the coolest thing in that game whatsoever. Like, all of the designs are sick, but Ultra Necrozma is by far the absolute best of those moments. Going up against this giant ball of light that just takes form into this kaiju, and then you can use Z moves against it, which I've said in the past is just like Power Ranger moves. In this case, it works. It's like you're going up against a monster in Power Rangers and you're using those poses to defeat it. It's super cool, and I would say it's one of the best parts about Sun Moon and the Ultra Sun and Moon. Seeing, Ultra Necrozma and fighting it is just the coolest thing. The Ultra Beasts, all of them are sick, but Ultra Necrozma is by far my favorite moment in those games. Next up, we have Sword and Shield. Galar is by far one of the best regions in my opinion. Even though a lot of people just want to hate on it for no reason, given how much you can do and see in that game, it's by far one of the best games. And the best moment in that game, even though Dynamaxing is a thing and Gigantamaxing is a thing, by far the moment that tops that for me is probably going to Ballonlea and seeing the bright and, charming nature of it. It's just one of the most beautiful areas I've ever seen in a Pokemon game. And genuinely, it's one of my absolute favorite moments from that game, and it's the one that stuck with me, because I remember going through that game and seeing all of the, areas and, seeing the castle architecture and all this stuff. But finally getting to Ballonlea and seeing the whimsical and bright but dark and, grim area, that is just so beautiful. And like I said, I'm a high fantasy nerd, so seeing this high fantasy aesthetic with, a Pokemon game is just, it's crazy. And it's such a cool moment when you walk into there. Not to mention, it probably has one of the sexiest gym leaders of all time. And don't at me on that, but she is the sexiest. Next up, we have a special mention in Legends Arceus. And I felt conflicted about putting this in because I don't know if it falls in the main series games. I would consider it main series, but a lot of people I know that just don't. They consider it a spin-off game. Me personally, I think it's main series because it doesn't, contrast anything like XD Gale of Darkness or, any of the other side games like Coliseum or Snap or Mystery Dungeon, etc. So, with that being said, easily the best moment in that game has to be seeing Spear Pillar being formed, or rather deformed, because that moment was just so cool and epic. And then you see the origin form for Palkia or Dialga, respectively, and it's just one of the coolest moments. Because, you see Spear Pillar in Diamond and Pearl and Platinum, but you just see ruins of it. You don't know what it actually looked like. So to see it being formed or deformed like that in such a grandiose way makes it so crazy and cool, and it was an awesome moment for me. Seeing Arceus was cool, and seeing all the new variants of Pokemon were awesome, but Spear Pillar is just, it's such a memorable moment. With that, it concludes my favorite moments in each main series game. I might do a kind of part 2 and go into the spin-off games, because I've played every single Pokemon game that there is. But I might do a spin-off game, and I might, you know, go into my favorite moments in each of the spin-off games. Also, please let me know your favorite moments from each of the Pokemon games in the comment. And please, if you liked the video, then please leave a like and subscribe. And if you didn't like the video, then I appreciate you watching until the end. It means the world to me. But until next time, make sure you get something to eat, you gorgeous meat Megazord!